According to a Democrat Party pollster, high information Democrat voters are not very enthusiastic about the state of President Biden's America. Here's a few of the words they used to describe how they feel about America today: frustrated, frightened, aggravated, discouraged, resigned. Now, many in this audience may not be surprised by those results and may, in fact, share those sentiments. But is the dissatisfaction with politicians, even on the left, when it's their politicians in office, is it a function of political developments or unrealistic expectations about what government is capable of accomplishing for people? Joining me now to discuss this, as we do every Friday, is David Closson. He's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. David, good to see you today.
Happy Friday. Great to be with you again, Joseph.
Happy Friday to you. And David, I've set up the kind of this poll results, and it's no surprise, I don't think, to anybody that there's a lot of frustrated Americans. And, you know, we know what gas prices are doing. We know about inflation. Headline this week is we have an actual shrinkage in the U.S. economy and the size of the gross domestic product. But it is interesting that even among those who have their guy in the White House, so to speak, they feel frustrated as well, maybe almost as frustrated as the people who voted for the other guy. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think in your lead-in, Joseph, I think that was really helpful. And I think increasingly, it's not a new development that on the campaign trail, politicians make grand and large promises that if you vote for them, they'll do everything that you want them to do. And increasingly, I think people are beginning to believe that more and more. I think I was over the weekend, or this past week, watching some clips from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Senator Bernie Sanders, who are kind of getting on the president's case on student forgiving or canceling student debt. And so I think increasingly a lot of people on the left, like you said, are frustrated with Biden because they think that he can just solve all of their problems, when in a representative democracy like we have, the government by design, it's not supposed to be able to solve all of our problems. Right. And the fact that it can't, people are now, even though their guys in power, are getting frustrated with it.
Yeah. I think there may also be something even more fundamental going on here. And this is the worldview segment. So I think we do need to frame this in terms of worldview, because when you're talking about a leftist worldview, a progressive perspective, however you want to define that, it is very often an atheistic one, a secular one. It is one that assumes if there is a God, he's not really that interested in what's happening. He mostly just wants us to be happy. And he certainly doesn't have any rules that he expects us to follow. And we're kind of on our own to do whatever makes us happy. And or if you have a fundamentally naturalist assumptions about the state of the world, you deny that there is anyone that you are accountable to for anything. And if you cannot look to God for help, for problems, or for perspective on what we're facing in life, the only alternative I think we have is government. Therefore, if government doesn't solve the problems, and I guess before I say that, we should say, does that mean that we place unrealistic expectations and hope that can never actually be delivered upon on our politicians, our favorite candidate, and just our political system in general?
Well, I think so, Joseph. I think it was John Calvin who said, all of us have, or it might have been Blaise Pascal said, we have a God-shaped vacuum. All of us are looking to fill that place of ultimate allegiance, that ultimate loyalty, one we look to who can provide for those things. And I think increasingly, again, I don't want to say this has only happened in the last couple of years. This has happened for a while. But I think more and more people do look to politics. People on the right and left do this. But people are increasingly looking to politics to solve all of their problems, to fulfill their deepest longings. And I think it's we're seeing that is not going to work out. That's not going to pan out for people, which is why as Christians we need to constantly go back to that biblical worldview, and that's where a right understanding of the delegated authority that government has. Government has authority. It's a derivative authority that's ultimately subservient to the authority that God has. And so I think a right understanding of authority, a right understanding of how society should be structured, I think all of that as Christians, as we articulate that, hopefully can bring more appropriate expectations for how people even look to their government for the things that they need.
If it is your instinct to look to Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Barack Obama or whoever it is that would be in Washington, D.C. to solve the pain in your life and the things that you're struggling with, it shouldn't really be a surprise that the words you would use to describe yourself are things like frustrated and frightened and aggravated. And David, the Christian worldview gives us someplace else to put our hope, right? And it gives us a perspective where when we see things going poorly, we're not really that surprised, both because we expect broken people to do broken things, and that's what governments are made out of. So we can't be shocked when they do things that they shouldn't do and do things that aren't helpful, because we understand that the heart is in many ways self-serving and that we're always dealing with the consequences of that. But doesn't it give us a perspective that we can navigate the political waves, the pendulum that swings back and forth in a way that allows us to maintain our peace?
Well, I think it does, Joseph. And of course, the biblical worldview gives us an understanding to think about specific issues, and those are issues you and I talk about on this show all the time. Right. The Bible gives us a perspective on life and family and religious freedom, but even taking a step back, which is what we're doing right now, I think the Bible does properly, it was Abraham Kuyper in his Sphere Sovereignty, I think at the turn of the previous century, helpfully described how there are these different spheres of authority, the church and the family and government. And at some places those overlap, and others they need to be kept apart and respected, kind of their jurisdictional sovereignty. And so, yes, I think the Christians, I think Christians engaging in politics should be some of the most hopeful people you'll find anywhere. Right. Because even if our bill dies in committee, even if our guy loses at the polls, at the end of the day, guess what? God is still on his throne, and the heart of the king is in God's hand. And so I do think, Joseph, what you said there is just, government 101 from a Christian perspective. We should be some of the most hopeful people in the world because of our categories of God's sovereignty and his providential working in history.
And as Christians, as we engage in this environment, in this sphere, we have to keep this top of mind so that our initial reaction to people's frustration and their hopelessness is not, hey, our guy will do it better and then he will be the answer to your frustrations. He won't be. There's not a blue, red, right, left solution to the hole in our hearts and just the challenges of life on earth. And of course, some ideas are better than others, and that's why we talk about this. But ultimately, what we want to do is provide people a perspective and a hope that allows them, whatever the results are on earth, our hope is ultimately in the fact that Jesus is going to redeem and restore it all, and we all get to look forward to that and join with him in that. But David, I'm going to change the topic again. Another news item that we talked about at the top of the show today with Congressman Ron Estes about this new Disinformation Governance Board. And many of us are jokingly, but perhaps seriously, referring to this as the Ministry of Truth, because that's what George Orwell referred to it as in 1984. And it seems to serve a similar purpose. But this idea, how do we think biblically about the idea of a disinformation governance board where you have a government body determining what is and is not true, and then presumably meting out punishment if they determine something is not true?
Yeah, I think my first take, Joseph, when I heard about what the DHS secretary said about this, I think they called it the Disinformation Governance Board, or what we're kind of referring to as the Ministry of Truth. I'm a little wary of this for sure. For people who are kind of going to say that they're going to, and Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, said that kind of they're going to be monitoring misinformation on COVID or the election, but pardon me if I don't trust that they're just going to keep that those are the only two issues they're going to focus on. The idea that a ministry of truth is going to be in the hands of people who believe that unborn babies are not humans and can be killed all throughout pregnancy, that doesn't make me feel confident. The idea that a ministry of truth will be in the hands of those who are telling us that we must use preferred pronouns are the same people that are telling us that boys can be girls, girls can be boys, the same people that are telling us that minor children should be able to get cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and even gender surgeries. That is, and also, Joseph, I'll just say, these are the same people also who unfairly targeted churches during the pandemic and either lied or, if we want to be charitable, at least changed their minds several times on what the science was. They've shown animus towards those of us who have Christian convictions. So the idea that they're going to be arbitrators of truth should have all of us paying attention.
It is a very fine line between, the way they've defined the terms is they make no distinction between a lie and something they just disagree with. And that's where language is such a powerful tool. And of course, when you have this disinformation governance board, it's intended to be part of that battle over words and language and give the official imprimatur, I don't remember the word I'm thinking of, but the government approval for this idea that this is true and this is false. And it's a dangerous thing. But from a worldview perspective, I think it does raise an important point for us, because what we are getting at here is a recognition is that there aren't many people who are primarily interested in the truth. And the fact that somebody works for the government does not make them any more of a truth seeker than someone who does not work for the government, right? It doesn't make them incapable of being interested in the truth, but it certainly doesn't guarantee that that's their highest goal. But this raises an important point for us as believers, because we are susceptible to this same temptation, the same vulnerability, where we just want to believe something is true because it fits our narrative and it's convenient for us to believe it's true. So we don't really dig very deep. We hear it. It's what we want to believe. And so we believe it. What's the best way to not fall prey to that?
I think the best way, Joseph, is to acknowledge what we just acknowledged. All of us have opinions. We all have beliefs. We all have strong feelings on certain things. But as Christians, first and foremost, we need to be people of the truth. In fact, as disciples of Jesus, who said in John 14:6 that what did Jesus say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. We are people of the truth who follow the truth. And so as Christians, we ought to be known as people who pursue truth no matter where it leads us. But the issue is, Joseph, we live in a postmodern world. It's postmodernism believed in reason and science to be able to provide reliable knowledge. Postmodernism now says there is no such thing as actual truth with a capital T. There's only preferences. There's only feelings. And so I think as Christians, we need to be aware of the times that we live in. Postmodernism is the dominant worldview in America right now. And so as Christians, to answer your question directly, Joseph, as Christians, we constantly need to be evaluating the news, seeing where our preferences are, our beliefs, our opinions, and being able to make sure that that we can disentangle those from the truth. Because Christians, first and foremost, ought to be known as people of objective, absolute truth.
And that means the willingness to disagree with somebody that we might otherwise like and ask critical questions. And David, last topic I want to get into with you, I want to connect the dots in two stories that might seem unrelated. They've been in the news lately. The first, of course, is the Parental Rights bill in Florida. Lots of people are aware of that. Parents basically saying, we do not want kindergarten teachers or third grade teachers talking to our young children about gender identity or sexual orientation, things of that nature. Another story that was at the Supreme Court this week was Coach Joe Kennedy. He's a high school football coach who was fired from his job because he would not stop praying within sight of his students after football games. Now, the issue here that raised at the Supreme Court is one of coercion and whether it's problematic for authority figures in children's lives to coerce their students. But in both cases, the parents would say that they don't want their students coerced. But do we, when it comes to the LGBT activist teachers in Florida or the praying coach in Washington, are they doing different things?
Well, I think so, Joseph, and I think that's why we can't pick and choose where we tell the truth. that the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill. That's the word "gay" obviously doesn't even appear in that bill, and so there was so much disinformation about that. And with the case of Coach Kennedy, there's been, I think the left has shown itself willing to compel or coerce him to do something. And so there is a double standard, which is where as Christians we need to come in and be honest about everything that we're dealing with. And that's how we'll gain trust in the long run.
And David, to me, it begs the question, what if Coach Joe had just wanted to go to the 50-yard line and talk to his kids about condom usage and LGBT allyship? Right? Would he have lost his job? And I think the answer is no. And I think the reason that's important is that it's not really the coercion that they're concerned about. It's what are we coercing them toward? It's the left wants to coerce, mold, disciple children in a particular way. We want to as well. The challenge in public spaces is that we no longer agree on what direction, how we want to mold our children. So there's lots of conflict happening in these spaces. But David, that's all the time we have for today. We'll cover more next week for sure. Thanks for being with us again on Friday.
Thank you, Joseph.